on leveraging food options as a variable to optimize nutrition. First, we will discuss what hunger actually maybe is. Not actually, but much more maybe. Second, we will discuss what this kind of could mean, and also maybe why it's currently not working in the current environment. And then third, we will draw the conclusions. One could describe hunger as an algorithm that is designed to give you the ideal nutrients at any point in time. And how intense hunger is and what you are hungry for is therefore basically what hunger then results in. If for some reason you begin to crave blueberries, or you begin to crave meat, or you begin to crave a banana, I don't know, then there might be some thinking behind this, but not thinking on your part, but some subconscious thinking that actually goes into this. If you crave bananas, maybe you crave bananas because of potassium. And also, if you're not hungry, so if this is your hunger level, then often you're not hungry. Often you are even worse than not hungry. You're basically kind of sickish to food. The thought of food is not only zero, it's not only neutral, but it's kind of appalling to now eat food. So it also controls it into the negative, one could say, to then optimize for maybe regeneration processes, or maybe because the body is kind of currently working against a virus. So now out there is a lot of stardust, you could say. And this stardust consists out of many different things and molecules. Some of these molecules bind together, some of these molecules, at least in the past, so were thought of like this atom unit in the middle, the core, and then we have the electrons floating around, and then sometimes they connect, but it's actually not circular, but they fly around in various different configurations. And then here are you. You are basically a big pile of atoms in this regard. But you are kind of also self-organizing. So now the question is, how do you choose these individual atoms here and there and here and there? By choosing maybe bigger conglomerates of atoms, such as a drop of water maybe contains some H2O, which maybe you don't require directly, but maybe you can then split it up as a body, and then you can use either the H or the O or some other thing. Or maybe you just need another atom. Maybe it's nitrite, or maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's iron, for example. The question or the problem this algorithm therefore tries to solve is, with this small hole you have in your mouth, how do you basically ingest the ideal things? Of course, you don't only ingest things into your mouth by eating, but also through breathing, for example. But also maybe you get vitamin A just through exposing your skin to light. But at least among all the nutrients we have to eat, and there is also thirst, which one could also just include in this algorithm. Sometimes you are just thirsty and you don't want to eat. Sometimes you are thirsty, but you also want to eat something, but you also are kind of into maybe a salad is the right choice. So what I'm trying to say here, or announce here, or state here, or at least, it seems somewhat likely that hunger is the algorithm that actually tries to solve this problem that is very, very complex. If you just think about all the different things you need, all the different things that are listed maybe on the back of a bottle of something, or on the back of a label of some food item, you might not understand them all. And your body is basically the most complex thing in the universe, so you might not be able to understand it. Of course, there's an argument to be made: who is smarter? Is it me or is it my body? What I am currently, or what I have arrived at in terms of this, is that here is my body, and my body, by evolution, or evolution designed kind of an additional thing that kind of sits on my body, is simulated by the resources and by also the subconscious and so on and so forth. And I am basically an employee that is employed by my body in order to increase the optimization, or in order to optimize my decisions even better than this thing alone could. So this thing alone would be a little dumber, maybe something like a monkey, but by giving me this here, or by creating me, by simulating me, but also by switching myself off every single night, but at the same time by also giving me dreams, which is also somewhat weird, there seems to be kind of a bi-directional conversation going on. And in this bi-directional conversation, there is also other things included, like emotions, like also hunger. Not that hunger is an emotion, but it is just, I think, among the same category of signals that go directly from the employee, maybe one could call the employee the architect, the designer, to the body itself. And now the body is just simplified. The rest, that is not you, that you think of yourself as you. So this could be conscious self. So we call it CS for conscious self. So now if one of these levers or one of these communication channels is hunger or thirst, or hunger and thirst combined, Hurst, then the question is, how do food choices, and this is now point 3, or the limitation, or basically decreasing or increasing the food choices you as a designer give your body, how does this influence the optimal nutrition? Or how does this basically optimize your nutrition or not optimize your nutrition? But before we arrive to the actual point, I think it is worth mentioning that maybe there is this, so one could maybe say that there is hunger, but hunger only works kind of in a very selective environment, you could say. And this selective environment is foods that hunger has adapted to as an algorithm. Think of it as a artificial intelligence, for example, or just a machine learning program that has a certain data set and it is trained on this data set. And in terms of evolution, this data set are the foods that have existed over all of the time, or most of the time, or some of the time, at which humans existed. So maybe also monkeys before, not that we were monkeys before, but we of course had the same kind of forefathers. Now, this also goes back to maybe the origin of life itself. But what I'm trying to say here is that maybe there's an argument to be made that the foods humans over time, or our genes over time, have been exposed to are maybe the foods hunger is the best adapted to. And if we then invent new foods, if all of these designers that we are, our conscious selves, are then optimizing for different things and offering this very tiny subset of actual foods, like the foods we have outside, but by taking these foods, and maybe by taking wheat, for example, and by making it better and better and better, or by optimizing it for harvest, for a big amount of harvest, and not just for nothing, basically, not just by evolution, not just optimized by evolution, but actually we optimize it for different goals. And these goals or objectives can be that we want to increase our harvest. This also could be that we want to make it taste even better. I mean, if you eat grain alone, it often does not taste that good. So if we then add salt, which is something that would otherwise be very difficult to get, if you have salt and you are this algorithm, and where would you get salt from? Like, animals often lick from stones, or I don't know how, for example, does a mouse get their salt intake? Probably with the food they eat, and with maybe also from being a carnivore, and other animals have also salt in them, so they might be a good salt source. But by now having additional foods, or turning these foods, converting these foods into other foods, hunger then sees these other foods as better. And it sees these other foods as better because evolutionary, maybe they were super rare. So if we now have a big fruit bowl in front of us, then the fructose seems to increase, or it seems to decrease basically the hunger hormones to some extent. At least that's what Andrew Huberman recently said. So if we now have fructose, and maybe the actual adaptation that would be useful is that if a bear, for example, sees lots of fruit in nature, then he eats a lot of it, and then he gets kind of fat, and then over winter he can use this fat in order to use it as energy when he sleeps, because some animals sleep over winter. Hibernation, I think, is the proper word. But if you now are exposed to these foods all the time, then the algorithm that is hunger maybe just works suboptimally compared to the dataset he's actually trained on. So therefore, this could lead to potentially being overweight, or overeating, or eating the wrong kinds of foods. Because if you then eat these kinds of foods, and these do have a less nutritious quality, or are just less nutrient dense if you define the nutrients as the required thing we defined earlier. So it is basically a high nutrient density would mean that the food meets kind of optimally, or if the nutrient density is basically maximum, then the food would meet the required need at an infinitely small point in time, which would be the time at which you are hungry or not hungry, ideally. So, or perfectly. And any deviation of it means that your body would have to ingest more of the given food in order to then make up for basically the lack of nutrient density. Or, this is a different point now, but also kind of the same thing. And for this, we create a random food. And this random food has 5 different things in it. Let's call them macro. So we have maybe 3 different macronutrients. Let's call them protein. So we have protein, we have fat, and we also have carbs. And these are all the macronutrients, so the nutrients that give us energy. But essentially, fat, especially the essential fats, and also the essential amino acids, the essential protein, is also used for something else, not just for energy. Whereas the carbs are mostly used just for energy. Now, in addition, we have the micronutrients, and this categorization is very common, even though now we just only included 2 micronutrients, water and salt, as just 2 as an example. So now the question is, how is a given food made up out of these? If we just take a look at these, then if we have a 60, basically a 30 to 30 to 30 split, so 1/3 of it would be protein, 1/3 of a given food would be fat, 1/3 of it would be carbs. This is good as long as the body needs exactly these kinds of nutrients in a given amount. So the amount is again kind of calculated to some extent, and then the hunger decreases as the amount is ingested. And the ratios are also somewhat measured. So there seem to be different kind of receptors in the digestive tract that measure the fat content, the carb content, and also the protein content. So then we have a feedback loop, and this feedback loop is basically, okay, now we adapt the hunger in the next infinitely small time interval, which could be 1 second, it could be 10 seconds, to the food that is already ingested, and see basically whether the protein or whether the nutrient need on the one hand and the given nutrients, the ingested nutrients on the other hand, are basically already kind of overlapping. And if they are not, then we can either eat more or we can eat different things. If, for example, you eat a lot of crackers and the crackers have also a lot of salt in them, then over time you might get thirsty. So the component that is missing in this case is water. So you could also eat a tomato instead of the cracker, and then you would already have the water filled in. So these are only the 3 macronutrients. Of course, we have lots of different micronutrients. So if there are maybe thousands, maybe hundreds, it depends on what you count in: minerals, vitamins, and also a lot of other things that might be beneficial for us. Like many supplements, for example, you could also count as micronutrients. Creatine, for example, is it a micronutrient? But if you ingest it, it seems to make the body perform more optimally, at least in terms of my workout performance. Experiential data from experience, not from experiments, which is not real data. So now we arrive at the final point. So let's say you have just one thing to eat, and there are actually some companies that try to make you only eat one thing, and that one thing would be the Ideal Nutrition. One of these companies I already tried out, or one of these meal shakes, and the idea behind a meal shake is simple. You just take the average thing the body needs, and you just make a meal shake that has maybe split like this in terms of the macronutrients, and then has additional splits in terms of the micronutrients, and in terms of minerals, in terms of vitamins. Now, the problem I think that arises is that it takes. So if you limit all of your food choice to just eating one thing, then if your body needs, let's just take protein as an example. If your body needs 200 grams of protein in a given day to replenish the muscle, to replenish and regenerate the muscle you kind of destroyed in your workout, maybe you didn't destroy it. It depends on the theory of what hypertrophy actually is based on. There seem to be several mechanisms, but let's just say you tore off some part of your skin, maybe in the middle, or I don't know, and this part of your skin needs to be regenerated. So therefore we have an actual regeneration process. For this regeneration process, we just need 200 grams of protein. Let's just make it easy. Now, these 200 grams of protein, if you have 2,000 calories, and these 2,000 calories per day would be your maintenance. So if these would be your maintenance, and you need 200 of these, but included in the 2,000 calories would only be 100 grams of protein because of the macronutrient split of, for example, Huel or another meal shake company like Mana or Bulk, for example, sells also meal shakes, or Foodspring. Is it actually Foodspring? Or YFood or Soylent. Now, if you then have such a given meal, ideally it would fulfill all your nutrients. But if you then have a mismatch between those two, what is the algorithm that is hunger left with to do? If you still need an additional 100 grams of protein, then the only thing that would be reasonable, if you need this, and if you need this now, and if your body also thinks that there might not be food in the next 3 days maybe, then it would make you eat an additional 2,000 calories of, let's say, Huel, Mana, or of the given meal that is the meal shake, that is the ideal meal. So the problem is that the body's needs constantly change. They change over time. They change from maybe second to second. So maybe right now I would need 1 gram of protein in addition to not eating, basically, or to fasting. That would maybe be optimal. But right now I don't eat. So therefore the hunger that I currently am experiencing slightly goes into nowhere. It kind of accumulates then into this one big meal. And of course, you can only eat so many different things at a given time. So you cannot eat like 300 different foods. So you have to create different meals. And this is where this balancing point on this spectrum, and the spectrum is actually just one variable, and this one variable is how many different food options you present yourself with. You as the designer, your head, present your body kind of with a buffet of different things you can eat. And then what I experience now is the following. If I ate Huel, for example, or I ate another milkshake I made myself, and I only could eat that milkshake, sometimes I had a slight feeling of hunger, but I couldn't get rid of this feeling of hunger by eating more Huel, for example. Why would this be the case? Because the Huel would not provide the nutrients given, and I would also eat too much Huel already, but still I would be hungry. So the problem is that I presented my body with too little food choices, so therefore it couldn't really choose from a given buffet of options that would have different macro and micronutrient ratios that would better align with the actual need at a infinitesimally, I don't know how the word is pronounced in English, at a marginal unit in time, or let's just say at your times where you usually eat. Let's just say you eat 3 meals a day. Then at these 3 meals a day, your body has to make sure that it kind of spikes your hunger at these specific times, because that's when you usually eat, and therefore it also then makes you eat if you then have food. Because if you then have food and you feel sick, or if you then have food and you still want to be working, then it doesn't really make sense. So the ghrelin actually rises. The ghrelin is the hunger hormone, seems to rise at certain points in the day at which you usually eat, and this seems to adapt to whenever you want to eat. So you could also change this. I therefore increased my food options, and increasing my food options in this case also meant that I quit being vegetarian after 6.5 years. Maybe because vegetarian just gave me not enough food options, so therefore I would eat something, but I would not get enough protein, for example, and therefore I would overeat constantly. So not that I overate constantly, this is just now an exaggeration. But let's just take a look at what I recently did. I introduced a few different meals, and these few different meals were options I presented my subconscious self with, kind of. So when I am hungry, I'm kind of like in a conversation with, okay, what would I like to eat? What would you like to eat? And then my body sometimes is like, not that my body is speaking to me, but I feel like eating like this. I feel like eating chicken right now, or I feel like eating curd right now, or I feel like eating just a salad. It's random. It's also not random, because obviously these things are called cravings. So if you have a craving for something, and if it doesn't necessarily mean that I take now the word as the negative I don't want to take the negative connotation the word craving usually has. I just want to use it as a concept to describe the thing I just described. So by giving myself a few more options, and including maybe cottage cheese, and including maybe also chicken, and including not only chicken but also different kinds of meats, I'm giving my body different options for what one of these things has the best fit or has the best alignment in terms of the micro and macronutrient ratios, that then allow me to basically, with a given caloric budget, that ideally is the maintenance budget, with a given caloric budget to not overeat. Because otherwise, if I only have this available, and a practical example of this would be that I have a few options. Cottage cheese, I also have sauerkraut, I also have protein eggs, which consists out of 5 eggs, 2 scoops of protein powder, which is 50 grams of protein plus a few additional carbs, and then I also added vegetables, 250 grams of vegetables, and a few other things. And this additionally has curd in it, and this additionally has chicken in it. And this is just protein eggs, but vegetarian. And this here is chicken. So if I now consult the oracle, that is my hunger, that is my subconscious, that is the rest of me that is not thinking me, then I could say, oh, do I like this? Oh, do I like this? And it sounds ridiculous if you make it obvious like this. But then my body can say, okay, how about you eat a little bit of this, and then you don't want to eat this any longer, and then you eat maybe a little bit of this. This is kind of, I think, at least in my experience, how hunger and satiety works. So what I did as of recently is, instead of trying to only come up with one meal that I would eat again and again and again, I had just a few different meals that would be stored. And I actually came up with a meal plan that kind of consisted of these different kinds of meals. And then I would eat them on a day-to-day basis, but sometimes I would just leave the chicken out because I didn't feel like chicken. Sometimes I leave the cottage cheese out because I don't feel like cottage cheese. Sometimes I don't feel like sauerkraut, but I actually just want maybe protein. And if I just want protein, then often the chicken seems to be the option that my body tends to gravitate towards. But as soon as I take out the cottage cheese, because I like cottage cheese very much, and it's also a little bit on the fattier side, because I don't take the super low fat option, because this actually just tastes better. And if this tastes better, then it seems to substitute somewhat for cravings that would otherwise occur. And therefore, if I have this in my fridge, for example, then it seems that I can eat in the long term more healthy compared to cravings that are occurring, and then my body makes me think of certain foods in the grocery store that I actually don't want to buy because they are either too expensive or they aren't healthy. So I recently took out the cottage cheese because, well, I took it out and then I realized that I just wanted cottage cheese. And then I took out the chicken because I tried to be vegetarian again. But I noticed that I could eat protein egg after protein egg and even additional protein powder, but I just would still feel hungry. My body would heat up to 32 degrees, at least according to the internal thermometer, or whatever it is called in my Garmin watch. My body would just heat up. I couldn't sleep because I was so heated up, but I also was hungry at the same time, just from the protein eggs. And then on another day, I don't want chicken at all, and I just want protein eggs. So this was kind of the theoretical analysis, at least to some extent, of what hunger maybe is, when hunger maybe works. In my experiences, in my experiences, hunger seems to only work if I only have healthy food. What do you consider as healthy food? This seems to be food that is without sugar. This also seems to alter my brain states and alter how I think, and also alter how hungry I actually am. If I eat lots of fruit or any kind of fruit, then my hunger also seems to kind of just not be there anymore. And I also cannot interact with hunger as well as I could if I only have healthy food options, because I cannot really trust it, because I'm just hungry all the time. And I could eat 5,000 calories all the time, but it doesn't make sense to eat 5,000 calories all the time. So my hunger and me seem to only kind of work together if I am capable enough to only provide healthy but good food options, maybe with enough protein, maybe with enough micronutrients, and then we kind of can work together. But if I fail to buy the right foods, or if I fail kind of to cage my hunger at the grocery store and buy lots of garbage, then what seems to happen is that then cannot trust this guy anymore. And if I cannot trust this guy anymore, it also means that I'm performing less and less optimal in the gym, also mentally, because my body then does not steer me really towards the right nutrients. Maybe it still tries to, but it just cannot function in an maybe environment, or it maybe can just not properly function in an environment that is also influenced by a lot of different designers, such as, or the designers being people, that optimize for revenue, that optimize for long-term addiction to a certain food, such as maybe McDonald's already getting the kids in and getting them addicted to fast food, not maybe clinically addicted, but in the general common sense word, or in the common sense we use this word. Or maybe it's watching chocolate in TV again and again and again, and then you just might buy this chocolate just because of the mere exposure effect. So in total, this game seems to be a game of limiting the food choice to an extent that allows you to eat healthy and to not kind of border out of the constrained given box you are in all the time. Because as soon as you open this up, at least in my case, then I can buy this and I can buy this, and then I have something that has added sugar in it again. And if I eat something with added sugar in it, then I end up 2 hours later with a full stomach and having eaten something with sugar, which I didn't want to eat, because it doesn't make sense. And it also is money that is completely thrown away, because for the same money, for example, I could have gotten a healthy option that actually would have meant that I would perform mentally better, that maybe the next time in the gym I would hit a new PR. But if I instead eat Snickers, then probably I don't.